Hello there and welcome. Tonight, we're going on a journey across the cosmos to explore one of the most profound questions humanity has ever asked. What might alien life actually look like? Not the little green men from science fiction movies, but real biologically plausible organisms that could exist on worlds vastly different from our own. Before we begin, I want you to get comfortable. This is a journey meant for relaxation, a quiet exploration of the universe that you can enjoy as you wind down for the evening. Feel free to close your eyes and simply listen or watch with the lights low. There's no need to remember every detail or take notes. Just let the ideas wash over you as we travel together through space and time, visiting distant worlds and imagining the life that might call them home. If you drift off along the way, that's perfectly fine. The universe will still be here tomorrow. For decades, we've been searching the skies, listening for signals, and studying distant planets. But here's something fascinating. The more we learn about the universe, the more we realize that life, if it exists elsewhere, probably doesn't look anything like us. Earth is just one type of planet, orbiting one type of star in a galaxy containing hundreds of billions of stars. And scientists estimate there are roughly 2 trillion galaxies in the observable universe. That's a lot of real estate where life could potentially emerge. But life doesn't develop in a vacuum. It's shaped by its environment in profound ways. The gravity of a planet, its atmospheric composition, the type of radiation it receives from its star, the availability of liquid solvents, the presence of certain chemical elements. All of these factors sculpt the forms that life can take. Evolution is essentially nature's problem-solving algorithm, and different problems require different solutions. So tonight, we're going to explore what alien life might look like on different types of planets. We'll venture to worlds of crushing gravity and feather-light surfaces, planets bathed in the dim, red glow of dying stars and those scorched by intense radiation. Frozen worlds where methane flows like water, and ocean planets with no land in sight. Along the way, we'll ground our speculation in the principles of biology, chemistry, and physics that govern all life as we understand it. The universe is far stranger than we ever imagined, and the life it might harbour could be equally extraordinary. But before we begin, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you enjoy what I'm doing here. Also, leave in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is there. It's great to see how these videos connect people from around the world. Now get comfortable, dim the lights, close your eyes if you'd like, let the city noise fade away, and let's begin our journey. Before we can imagine what alien life looks like, we need to understand what life actually requires. On Earth, we have a pretty good template, but scientists caution against being too Earth-centric in our thinking. This tendency to assume alien life must be like Earth life is called carbon chauvinism, and it's something astrobiologists actively try to avoid. That said, Earth life gives us our only working example, so it's a reasonable starting point. All life on Earth shares certain requirements. It needs energy, it needs raw materials to build structures, it needs a solvent in which chemical reactions can occur, and it needs a way to store and transmit information. For Earth life, carbon forms the backbone of all organic molecules. Why carbon? Because carbon atoms can form stable bonds with up to 4 other atoms, creating an enormous variety of complex molecules. Carbon can form long chains, branching structures, and rings, the architectural diversity needed for the complexity of life. Scientists estimate that carbon can form tens of millions of different compounds, providing the chemical versatility life requires. Water serves as life's universal solvent on Earth. Roughly 70% of our planet's surface is covered in water, and every living thing we know requires it. Water has some remarkable properties. It remains liquid across a relatively wide temperature range. It's an excellent solvent for many chemicals. It becomes less dense when it freezes, which allows ice to float and aquatic life to survive beneath. And it's abundant in the universe. But here's where things get interesting. Could life use something other than carbon and water? Silicon sits right below carbon on the periodic table and can also form 4 bonds. Could silicon-based life exist? What about other solvents like ammonia, methane, or even sulfuric acid? The answer is possibly, but with significant constraints. Silicon bonds aren't as stable as carbon bonds at high temperatures, and silicon compounds tend to form crystals rather than the flexible chains needed for complex chemistry. However, on a very cold world, silicon biochemistry might be more feasible. Similarly, while water is an exceptional solvent, ammonia remains liquid at much lower temperatures and could potentially support life on frozen worlds. The key insight is this: life needs complexity, stability, and the ability to evolve. Whatever chemistry it uses must allow for information storage, metabolism, to harvest energy, and reproduction with variation. These are the non-negotiables, but the specific molecules that accomplish these tasks might be quite different from what we see on Earth. What about energy? Life needs to power itself, and on Earth, we see 2 primary strategies: photosynthesis, which harvests energy from sunlight, and chemosynthesis, which extracts energy from chemical reactions. On a planet orbiting a dim star, or one shrouded in thick clouds, photosynthesis might be impossible or inefficient. Life there might rely entirely on chemical energy, perhaps tapping into volcanic vents or radioactive decay. Information storage is another crucial requirement. Earth life uses DNA and RNA, elegant molecules that encode instructions for building proteins. Could alien life use something completely different? Possibly, though any information storage system needs to be stable enough to preserve information, but flexible enough to allow mutations and evolution. Scientists have even created artificial genetic systems in laboratories using different molecular structures, proving that DNA isn't the only option. As we explore different types of planets, keep these fundamentals in mind. Life is resourceful and adaptive, but it can't violate the laws of chemistry and physics. The question isn't whether alien life follows the same rules, it must, but rather how creatively it solves the problems those rules present. Let's begin our planetary tour with super-Earths, one of the most common types of planets astronomers have discovered. A super-Earth is typically defined as a rocky planet with a mass between 1 and 10 times that of Earth. These worlds are abundant in our galaxy. In fact, they're far more common than Earth-sized planets, which makes them prime candidates in the search for alien life. But life on a super-Earth would face a fundamental challenge that shapes everything about its biology: intense gravity. Imagine a rocky planet with 5 times Earth's mass and about 1.5 times its radius. The surface gravity on such a world would be more than twice what we experience here, roughly 2.5 times Earth's gravity, in fact. If you weighed 150 pounds on Earth, you'd weigh 375 pounds on this super-Earth. This has profound implications for any life that might evolve there. First, let's consider the basics of how organisms are built. On Earth, gravity is a constant engineering constraint. Tall trees need thick trunks to support their weight. Large animals need sturdy bones and powerful muscles. The largest animals that have ever lived on land, dinosaurs like Argentinosaurus, were right at the physical limits of what bone and muscle can support in Earth's gravity. Blue whales are even more massive, but they're aquatic animals, supported by water's buoyancy. On a high-gravity super-Earth, these constraints become far more severe. Any land-dwelling creatures would need to be low to the ground, squat and heavily built. Evolution would favour compact body plans with thick, powerful limbs. Tall structures would be extremely disadvantageous. One fall could be fatal, and the energy cost of standing upright would be prohibitive. Picture creatures that resemble terrestrial crabs or turtles more than mammals or birds. Wide, stable bases of support, multiple legs, perhaps 6 or 8 rather than 4, would distribute weight more effectively. Thick, possibly armoured skin might evolve not just for protection, but as structural support, like an exoskeleton. Internal skeletons, if they exist, would need to be incredibly dense and robust. Flying would be enormously challenging on a high-gravity world. Birds can fly on Earth because they've evolved lightweight hollow bones, efficient muscles, and feathers that generate lift. But on a super-Earth with 2 or 3 times our gravity, the energy required to achieve and maintain flight would increase dramatically. Any flying creatures would likely be small, with proportionally massive flight muscles and perhaps unconventional methods of staying aloft. Could intelligence evolve under such constraints? There's no reason to think high gravity would prevent it, but intelligent creatures might look nothing like us. They might be low, sprawling organisms with distributed nervous systems, perhaps something resembling a highly intelligent octopus, but adapted for land, a creature with multiple limbs for both locomotion and manipulation, close to the ground with a distributed body plan. Interestingly, the high gravity might favour certain adaptations we'd consider advanced. Strong muscles and efficient circulatory systems would be essential, perhaps leading to remarkably powerful creatures despite their compact size. The atmosphere on a super-Earth would likely be much denser than Earth's due to the stronger gravitational pull, which might support organisms in unexpected ways. Think of it like moving through water rather than air, providing some support and resistance. Here's another consideration. On a high-gravity world, erosion and weathering processes would be accelerated. Rain falls harder, avalanches are more devastating, and mountains can't grow as tall because rock itself has structural limits. The landscape might be relatively flat with low-worn mountains. This could affect evolution in interesting ways, perhaps favouring organisms that live in or near water, where buoyancy offsets some of gravity's burden. The evolutionary pressure towards shorter, stouter body plans would be relentless. Over millions of years, this would produce an entire ecosystem of compact organisms. Plants, or whatever serves the role of primary producers, would probably be low-growing, perhaps resembling mosses or ground-hugging shrubs more than towering trees. In water, however, larger organisms could thrive, supported by buoyancy. Could humans visit a super-Earth? Briefly, perhaps, but living there would be extremely challenging. Moving would require enormous effort, and over time, the constant crushing force would stress our bones, muscles, and cardiovascular system. We didn't evolve for such conditions. But for organisms that did evolve there, it would simply be normal. They'd likely find Earth's weak gravity unsettling, like living in constant freefall. The key takeaway is this: gravity isn't just a background parameter, it's a fundamental selective pressure that shapes the size, structure, and behaviour of every organism. On a super-Earth, alien life would be built for strength and stability over height and speed, creating a world of sturdy, powerful creatures adapted to endure forces that would crush most Earth life. Let's shift our attention to one of the most common and bizarre types of potentially habitable planets: tidally locked worlds orbiting red dwarf stars. This scenario is particularly important because red dwarfs, small cool stars that burn slowly and steadily, are the most abundant type of star in the galaxy, making up about 70% of all stars. Many of the closest potentially habitable planets we've discovered, like Proxima Centauri b, fall into this category. But what does it mean for a planet to be tidally locked? You're already familiar with this phenomenon, even if you don't realise it. Our moon is tidally locked to Earth, which is why we always see the same face of the moon from Earth's surface. The moon's rotation period equals its orbital period, so one side perpetually faces us, while the other remains forever hidden. Now imagine an entire planet in this situation, with one hemisphere permanently facing its star and the other perpetually in darkness. One side experiences endless day, the other endless night. No sunrise, no sunset, no day-night cycle at all. This happens because red dwarf stars are small and dim. So for a planet to be warm enough for life, it must orbit very close to the star. At such close distances, the star's gravitational pull creates tidal forces that gradually slow the planet's rotation until it becomes locked. The implications for life are staggering. The day side would be continuously bathed in the red dwarf's light. Depending on the planet's atmosphere, this hemisphere could become extremely hot, perhaps hundreds of degrees at the subsolar point, the spot directly beneath the star. Meanwhile, the night side would radiate heat into space without any input from the star, potentially becoming frozen and inhospitable. Without an atmosphere to circulate heat, the temperature difference between hemispheres could be severe enough to freeze the entire night side solid. But here's where planetary atmospheres become crucial. If the planet has a sufficiently thick atmosphere, winds would circulate heat from the day side to the night side, potentially creating a narrow habitable zone between the two extremes, a ring of perpetual twilight circling the planet. This twilight zone might be where life could survive and thrive. What would life look like in such a divided world? On the day side, organisms would need to cope with constant, unrelenting radiation from their sun. Red dwarf stars emit most of their energy in the red and infrared portions of the spectrum, so photosynthetic organisms, if they exist, might appear black or very dark in colour to absorb as much of this long wavelength light as possible. This is actually opposite to Earth plants, which appear green because they reflect green light while absorbing blue and red wavelengths. On a red dwarf world, you might have black forests or dark purple vegetation. The continuous daylight would mean no circadian rhythms as we understand them. Earth life is deeply adapted to the day-night cycle, with countless biological processes timed to this rhythm. On a tidally locked world, there'd be no evolutionary pressure for such cycles. Life might be continuously active, or it might develop other rhythms tied to weather patterns, seasonal atmospheric changes, or internal biological clocks unrelated to stellar movement. Creatures on the day side might evolve impressive heat management systems. Think of large, thin structures for radiating excess heat, possibly resembling sails or fins. Alternatively, life might retreat underground during the hottest periods, emerging during storms or when cloud cover provides relief. Underground ecosystems could be extensive, with life tapping into geothermal energy or chemical resources in the rock. Now consider the night side. If heat circulation is poor, this hemisphere could be a frozen wasteland with temperatures plunging far below zero. Any atmosphere might even freeze out and snow down onto the surface. But this doesn't necessarily mean the night side is lifeless. On Earth, we find life in the most extreme environments, deep ocean vents, Antarctic ice, miles underground. A frozen night side might harbour chemosynthetic life around volcanic vents or in subsurface oceans warmed by tidal heating or radioactive decay. The terminator zone, the ring between day and night, is perhaps the most intriguing environment. Here the sun would hang perpetually at the horizon, casting long shadows and creating a dim, reddish twilight. This region might offer the most stable temperatures, neither too hot nor too cold, making it a potential haven for complex life. Organisms in the terminator zone might be uniquely adapted to low light conditions. Eyes, if they evolved, might be extremely large and sensitive, capable of gathering every available photon. Alternatively, life might rely heavily on other senses, sound, chemical detection, touch, or even electroreception. The relatively constant conditions might allow for very specialized organisms finely tuned to their specific environment. Here's an interesting question. Would intelligent life be more or less likely on a tidally locked world? There's no definitive answer, but we can speculate. The constant environmental conditions might actually be advantageous in some ways. No need to adapt to seasonal changes or day-night cycles. However, the limited habitable area might restrict biodiversity, potentially slowing evolution. Then again, the harsh gradients between day and night could drive adaptation and innovation. If intelligence did evolve, the inhabitants would have a very different understanding of the cosmos. To them, the star wouldn't rise and set, it would be a fixed point in space, either overhead, at the horizon, or never visible, depending on where they lived. The concept of a day would be meaningless. They might measure time by other phenomena, atmospheric cycles, biological rhythms, or the movement of other celestial objects. One more consideration. Red dwarf stars are notorious for stellar flares, sudden eruptions of radiation and charged particles. A planet orbiting close to such a star would be bombarded by these events, which could strip away its atmosphere over time unless the planet had a strong magnetic field for protection. Life on such a world might need to cope with periodic radiation storms, perhaps by sheltering underground or developing impressive repair mechanisms for radiation damage to their biochemistry. Tidally locked worlds challenge our assumptions about what makes a planet habitable. They're neither Earth-like nor obviously hostile to life. They're simply different, requiring adaptations we might not have imagined, but which could be perfectly viable solutions to the challenges they present. Now let's dive beneath the waves and explore ocean worlds, planets or moons completely covered in water or other liquids, with little to no exposed land. This isn't mere speculation. Right here in our own solar system, we have several strong candidates: Jupiter's moon Europa, Saturn's moon Enceladus, and possibly others. These icy moons are thought to harbour vast subsurface oceans beneath their frozen crusts, kept liquid by tidal heating from their host planets. But let's think bigger. Imagine a full-size planet where the entire surface is ocean, not just a shallow covering, but perhaps hundreds of kilometres of water, far deeper than Earth's oceans. No continents, no islands, no land whatsoever. What could life look like in such a world? First, let's consider the basics of an ocean ecosystem. On Earth, marine life is incredibly diverse, ranging from microscopic plankton to blue whales, from coral reefs in shallow waters to bizarre creatures in the lightless depths. An ocean world would need similar ecological foundations: primary producers that harvest energy, consumers that eat them, and decomposers that recycle nutrients. On Earth, ocean ecosystems are fueled primarily by photosynthesis in the upper layers where sunlight penetrates. Microscopic phytoplankton drift near the surface, converting sunlight and dissolved carbon dioxide into organic matter, forming the base of the food chain. On an ocean world with a transparent atmosphere and clear water, the same basic process could occur, but what if the water is murky, filled with suspended particles? What if thick ice covers the surface, blocking sunlight entirely? In such cases, life would need alternative energy sources. Earth's deep-sea hydrothermal vents provide a powerful example. These underwater hot springs release chemicals, particularly hydrogen sulfide, from Earth's interior. Specialized bacteria harvest energy from these chemicals through chemosynthesis, forming the base of an ecosystem that includes tube worms, clams, crabs, and fish, all thriving in complete darkness, independent of the sun. An ice-covered ocean world could have similar vent ecosystems, perhaps even more extensive than Earth's. Now let's consider what organisms might look like on an ocean world. Without land, there'd be no evolutionary pressure to develop structures for terrestrial life. No lungs for breathing air, no legs for walking, no concern about desiccation. Instead, evolution would be entirely focused on aquatic adaptations. In the upper layers of a sunlit ocean world, life might resemble Earth's marine ecosystems, photosynthetic organisms, perhaps forming vast floating mats, or enormous jellyfish-like creatures with photosynthetic symbionts. Predators might evolve streamlined forms for efficient swimming, with sensory systems adapted to tracking prey through three-dimensional space. But here's where things get interesting. Without solid surfaces, many ecological niches we're familiar with wouldn't exist. Forests, burrows, grasslands, none of these have ocean equivalents. Instead, the entire ecosystem would be suspended in water. Life would need to either actively swim or passively float, constantly expending energy to maintain position or drifting with currents. Some organisms might evolve to be neutrally buoyant, perfectly balanced, so they neither sink nor rise. Gas bladders, oil reservoirs, or lightweight skeletons could achieve this, allowing creatures to hover effortlessly at their preferred depth. Others might intentionally sink to the ocean floor, where they could anchor themselves and filter feed on particles drifting down from above. Speaking of the ocean floor, even on a planet with no land, there would still be a bottom, a solid crust beneath the water. This sea floor could be geologically active, with underwater volcanoes, rifts, and mineral deposits. Life might cluster around these features, creating rich ecosystems similar to Earth's hydrothermal vent communities. Let's think about size for a moment. Earth's largest animals are aquatic. Blue whales can reach lengths of 30 meters and weigh over 150 tons. Water's buoyancy removes many of the size constraints that limit land animals. On an ocean world with vast, uninterrupted seas and abundant resources, could creatures grow even larger? Possibly. Without the need to ever support their weight on land, and with three-dimensional space to move in, truly enormous organisms might evolve. Gentle filter feeders, drifting through the water like living ships, or perhaps massive predators ruling their domains. But size isn't everything. Some of the most successful organisms on Earth are small, numerous, and adaptable. An ocean world might be dominated by vast swarms of small creatures, coordinating their behavior in complex ways. Scientists have observed schools of fish and swarms of krill that move with almost eerie coordination, responding to threats and opportunities as if they were a single organism. On an ocean world, such collective behavior might be even more sophisticated. What about intelligence? Could intelligent life evolve in an ocean? On Earth, dolphins, whales, and octopuses demonstrate considerable cognitive abilities. Octopuses, in particular, are fascinating. They're highly intelligent despite having evolved in a completely different lineage from mammals, showing that intelligence can arise through multiple evolutionary pathways. An intelligent aquatic species on an ocean world would face unique challenges. Building technology is difficult underwater. Fire is impossible. Metallurgy requires air. And many chemical processes we take for granted don't work in aqueous environments. However, this doesn't preclude technological development entirely. Such a civilization might work with biological materials, domesticate other organisms, or develop sophisticated tools from stone, bone, and shell long before discovering methods to create air-filled environments where they could experiment with fire and metals. Here's a haunting possibility. What if an ocean world is completely covered by a thick ice shell, like Europa? Life in such a subterranean ocean would exist in eternal darkness, unaware that a universe of stars exists beyond the ice above them. Their entire cosmos would be the ocean itself, the seafloor below and the ice ceiling above. They might develop myths and philosophies about what lies beyond the ice, never suspecting the truth. If intelligence evolved in such an environment, would they ever discover astronomy, or would the cosmos remain forever out of reach? Ocean worlds remind us that life doesn't need land to thrive. Water is an excellent medium for life. It's stable, it distributes nutrients, it moderates temperature, and it allows for three-dimensional movement. Some scientists even suggest that ocean worlds might be more common than terrestrial ones, meaning that aquatic life could be the universe's predominant form. Not all potentially habitable planets offer comfortable, protected environments. Some worlds might be bathed in radiation, either from their parent star, from lacking a protective magnetic field, or from other cosmic sources. Yet even in these hostile conditions, life might find a way. Earth life has already shown us just how resilient biology can be when faced with radiation, offering tantalizing hints about what alien organisms might achieve. First, let's understand the challenge. Radiation, whether in the form of ultraviolet light, X-rays, or charged particles, damages biological molecules. It can break chemical bonds, create reactive molecules that wreak havoc in cells, and most critically, damage DNA or whatever information storage molecule a life form uses. Without DNA, there's no blueprint for building and maintaining the organism. Too much damage, and the organism dies. On Earth, we're protected from most space radiation by two things: our atmosphere, which absorbs and scatters incoming radiation, and our magnetic field, which deflects charged particles from the solar wind. A planet lacking one or both of these shields would be far more hostile to life as we know it. Planets orbiting close to active stars, especially red dwarfs, with their notorious flares, or planets with weak or non-existent magnetic fields, would face relentless radiation bombardment. But here's the remarkable thing. Life on Earth has already evolved to handle extraordinary radiation levels. Consider Deinococcus radiodurans, a bacterium nicknamed Conan the Bacterium, for its seemingly indestructible nature. This organism can withstand radiation doses thousands of times higher than would be lethal to humans, levels that would sterilize most environments. How does it do this? The secret lies in redundancy and repair. Deinococcus radiodurans has multiple copies of its genome, so when radiation shatters its DNA into hundreds of fragments, the cell can use the undamaged copies as templates to reassemble the correct sequence. It has incredibly efficient DNA repair machinery that can reconstruct its genome in just a few hours after catastrophic damage. Additionally, it produces proteins and other molecules that protect its cellular machinery from oxidative damage. If Earth life can evolve such impressive radiation resistance, what might life on a high radiation world achieve? On such a planet, every organism would need robust protection and repair mechanisms. Radiation resistance wouldn't be a specialized adaptation. It would be fundamental to survival. As basic as the ability to metabolize or reproduce, life might have multiple redundant copies of its genetic material, far beyond what we see in even the most resistant Earth organisms. Every species would have DNA repair systems operating continuously, fixing damage as it occurs. Physical shielding might also evolve. On Earth, some organisms produce pigments that absorb UV radiation, protecting underlying tissues. Melanin in human skin serves this function. On a high radiation world, organisms might evolve thick, heavily pigmented outer layers, perhaps even containing metals or other elements that effectively block radiation. Imagine creatures with natural lead-lined skin or organic compounds that absorb and dissipate radiation as heat. Alternatively, organisms might simply accept that their surface cells will be constantly damaged and evolve rapid replacement mechanisms. Like how human skin cells are continuously shed and replaced, life on a radiation-soaked world might have outer layers that are essentially sacrificial, protecting the inner body while being constantly destroyed and regenerated. Here's an intriguing possibility. What if organisms not only tolerated radiation, but actually used it? On Earth, there's a fungus called Cryptococcus neoformans that appears to perform radiosynthesis, using melanin to capture energy from radiation, similar to how plants use chlorophyll to capture sunlight. This fungus was discovered growing on the walls of the abandoned Chernobyl nuclear reactor, thriving in the intense radiation. While scientists are still studying exactly how this works, it suggests that radiation could serve as an energy source, not just a hazard. On a high radiation world, radiosynthetic organisms might form the base of the ecosystem, harvesting energy from the abundant radiation and converting it into usable chemical energy. These could be the primary producers, equivalent to Earth's plants, creating organic matter that supports consumers higher in the food chain. The entire biosphere might be built on radiation as its fundamental energy source. Life on such a world would likely favour environments that offer some protection. Underground ecosystems would thrive, shielded by layers of rock. Life in water would also have an advantage. Water is an excellent radiation shield, and even a few meters of depth would significantly reduce exposure. Surface life might be limited to the most resistant organisms, perhaps resembling Earth's extremophiles, but far more sophisticated. What would complex multicellular life look like in these conditions? That's harder to predict. Complex organisms have more ways to fail, more types of cells that can be damaged, more intricate systems that can malfunction. On Earth, the most radiation-resistant organisms are relatively simple bacteria, but given enough evolutionary time and selective pressure, could complex, even intelligent life evolve on a high-radiation world? Possibly. The key would be that every cell in the organism would need exceptional repair capabilities. The organism might mature slowly, with extended developmental periods, allowing time for constant repair. Reproduction might involve extra safeguards, perhaps producing many offspring, with the expectation that some will have too much genetic damage to survive, or developing protected embryonic stages, shielded deep within the parent's body. An intelligent species from such a world would have a very different relationship with technology and physics than we do. They'd understand radiation intimately, from direct experience. Their biology would be a marvel of molecular engineering, with repair mechanisms far more sophisticated than anything on Earth. If they developed space travel, they'd find most other planets remarkably benign by comparison. Gentle worlds, where radiation barely poses a threat. One more thought: radiation pressure might drive rapid evolution. Increased mutation rates, if coupled with efficient selection and repair mechanisms, could accelerate evolutionary change. Such a world might be biologically diverse and innovative, with new species emerging relatively quickly and adaptation happening at an accelerated pace. The harsh conditions might paradoxically create a vibrant, dynamic biosphere. High radiation planets challenge our assumptions about habitability, but they also illustrate a fundamental truth: life is not fragile. Given enough time and evolutionary pressure, biology can find solutions to problems that seem insurmountable. The universe might be full of organisms that would find our concerns about radiation quaintly unnecessary. Frozen worlds. Life in the cold dark. Now let's journey to the outer reaches of planetary systems, where dim starlight barely warms the surface, and temperatures plunge far below the freezing point of water. These are the frozen worlds, planets, and moons where ice dominates the landscape. Yet even here, in conditions that seem utterly hostile, life might exist in ways that challenge our understanding. Earth itself has proven that life can survive extreme cold. Antarctica's ice shelves harbour bacterial communities in liquid pockets within the ice. Arctic fish produce antifreeze proteins that prevent ice crystals from forming in their tissues. Tardigrades, microscopic animals known as water bears, can survive being frozen solid, reviving when conditions improve. But these organisms merely endure the cold. Could life actually thrive in permanently frozen environments? The answer might lie in alternative biochemistry. Water freezes at 0 degrees Celsius under normal pressure, but other chemicals remain liquid at far lower temperatures. Methane, for instance, remains liquid from negative 161 to negative 182 degrees Celsius. Ethane has a similar range. Ammonia stays liquid down to negative 77 degrees Celsius, and when mixed with water, it can remain liquid at even lower temperatures. Saturn's largest moon, Titan, gives us a real-world example. Titan has lakes and seas of liquid methane and ethane on its surface, with temperatures around negative 180 degrees Celsius. For decades, scientists have speculated about whether life could exist in these frigid hydrocarbon seas. Such life would be radically different from anything on Earth. It would need to use methane, or ethane, as its solvent instead of water, and its biochemistry would operate at a crawl compared to Earth life. What would methane-based life look like? At such low temperatures, chemical reactions proceed slowly. Life on Titan, if it exists, might live in extreme slow motion from our perspective. A creature's lifetime might span centuries, with metabolism so sluggish that growth and reproduction take decades or longer. But from the organism's perspective, time would feel normal. It would have no reference point for comparison. Physical forms would be constrained by the properties of liquid methane. It's less dense than water and has a much lower surface tension. This means floating and swimming would require different adaptations than in Earth's oceans. Methane also isn't as good a solvent as water, limiting the types of molecules that could dissolve and interact in it. Life would need to work with a more limited chemical palette. One fascinating possibility: cell membranes. On Earth, cell membranes are made of lipid molecules that form bilayers in water, oily molecules with water-loving heads and water-hating tails. In methane, which is itself oily, conventional lipid membranes wouldn't work. Scientists have proposed exotic alternatives, like azotosomes, theoretical cell membranes made from nitrogen, hydrogen, and carbon compounds that could function in liquid methane. Such membranes would be completely unlike anything in Earth's biology, but methane seas aren't the only option for frozen worlds. Many icy moons are thought to have subsurface oceans of liquid water, kept from freezing by tidal heating. Europa, Enceladus, and possibly Ganymede and Callisto all fall into this category. These hidden oceans are insulated by kilometers of ice, protecting them from the cold vacuum of space. Here life could potentially use familiar, water-based chemistry while being completely isolated from the surface. What's particularly intriguing about these subsurface oceans is that they might be geologically active. The tidal forces that keep them liquid also likely create hydrothermal vents on the ocean floor, the same features that support thriving ecosystems in Earth's deep oceans. Life in Europa's ocean could be very similar to life around Earth's deep sea vents, chemosynthetic bacteria forming the base of the food chain, with more complex organisms feeding on them. But such life would exist in eternal darkness, never seeing their sun or stars, encased in a world of ice and water. Would evolution produce eyes in such an environment? Possibly not. Other senses, like chemical detection, electroreception, or echolocation, might be more valuable. Organisms might be ghostly pale, lacking any need for pigmentation, resembling Earth's cave-dwelling creatures that have lost their coloration over evolutionary time. Now consider a different type of frozen world, a rogue planet, ejected from its star system and drifting through interstellar space. Such planets receive no starlight at all. Any surface would be frozen solid, with temperatures approaching absolute zero. Could life exist on such a world? At first glance, it seems impossible. But look beneath the surface. A large planet retains internal heat for billions of years from its formation and from radioactive decay in its core. This heat could maintain subsurface oceans or pockets of liquid even without a sun. If the planet had a thick insulating ice shell and a geologically active interior, there might be habitable zones deep underground. Life on a rogue planet would be entirely dependent on geothermal and chemical energy. No photosynthesis, no solar-driven weather patterns, just the slow cooling of an abandoned world and the chemistry of its interior. Such life might exist in isolated pockets, perhaps never developing into complex ecosystems due to limited resources and energy, but persisting nonetheless. Here's a question that arises with frozen worlds. Would intelligent life be less likely in such cold environments? The slow pace of chemistry at low temperatures might slow evolution. Limited energy availability might restrict the evolution of energetically expensive traits, like large brains. The harsh, relatively uniform environments might offer fewer niches and thus less biodiversity to drive evolutionary innovation. Then again, some scientists argue the opposite. Stable, cold environments might favour long-lived organisms with extended lifespans, potentially allowing for the accumulation of learned knowledge and the development of complex behaviours. The challenges of such environments might select for intelligence and problem-solving abilities. We simply don't know enough to say for certain. If intelligence did evolve on a frozen world, such beings would have a radically different existence than ours. They might live beneath thick ice in darkness, with no concept of stars or sky. Their entire universe would be the enclosed environment they inhabit. Or they might be exotic creatures, skating across methane seas, building cities from frozen hydrocarbons, adapted to temperatures that would shatter us instantly. Frozen worlds teach us that habitable is a broader concept than we once thought. Life doesn't need comfortable, temperate conditions. It needs liquid solvents, energy sources, and time. Whether those solvents are water or liquid methane, whether that energy comes from sunlight or volcanic vents, life can potentially adapt and persist in the cold, dark places we once thought utterly barren. Desert planets. Survival in arid extremes. Let's turn now to the opposite extreme. Desert planets, worlds with little to no water on the surface, where aridity rather than cold poses the primary challenge to life. Think of Frank Herbert's Dune, with its endless sand dunes and precious water, or even Mars, which was once wetter but is now a frozen desert, with only trace amounts of water vapour in its atmosphere. Could life survive, or even thrive, on such dry worlds? Earth's deserts provide instructive examples. The Atacama Desert in Chile is the doctoriest place on Earth outside of the polar regions. Some areas have received no measurable rainfall for decades. Yet life persists. Bacteria live in salt deposits, extracting tiny amounts of moisture from the air. Lichens survive in this extreme environment, going dormant during dry periods and reviving when rare fog or dew provides moisture. If Earth life can adapt to such conditions, what might be possible on even drier planets? The key challenge on a desert planet is managing water, or whatever liquid is essential for the organism's biochemistry. On Earth, most organisms are mostly water. Humans are about 60% water by weight. We need constant hydration, losing water through breathing, sweating, and excretion. In a desert environment, every drop is precious. Earth's desert organisms have evolved remarkable water conservation strategies. Cacti store water in their thick stems and minimize water loss by having spines instead of leaves. Kangaroo rats in North American deserts can survive their entire lives without drinking water, extracting all the moisture they need from the seeds they eat. Camels can tolerate losing up to 25% of their body weight in water, a loss that would be fatal to most mammals. Their blood cells are specially adapted to function even when dehydrated, and they can rehydrate rapidly when water becomes available. On a planet with even less water, life would need to take these strategies further. Perhaps organisms would have nearly impermeable outer coverings, minimizing any water loss. They might be largely inactive, going into suspended animation for long periods and only becoming active during rare periods of moisture availability, like Earth's brine shrimp, whose eggs can remain dormant for years until conditions are right. But here's an interesting thought. What if life on a desert planet didn't use water at all? We've already discussed methane-based life for cold worlds. On a hot, dry planet, other solvents might work. Formamide remains liquid across a wide temperature range and can dissolve both polar and non-polar molecules, making it a versatile biochemical medium. Sulfuric acid, despite being highly corrosive, might support exotic life forms under certain conditions. Life might be based on completely different chemistry than Earth's biology. A desert planet might also have liquid water, but only underground. Mars likely has subsurface pockets of briny water, kept liquid by dissolved salts that lower the freezing point. Life on such a world might be entirely subterranean, living in aquifers deep beneath the dry surface. This life might never experience the surface environment at all, existing in a hidden biosphere we couldn't easily detect from orbit. What about complex multicellular organisms on a desert world? They would face significant challenges. Large bodies require substantial water to maintain, but evolution might find solutions. Perhaps organisms would have extremely efficient recycling systems, capturing every molecule of water from their waste. They might be mostly dormant, coming alive only briefly when rare rainstorms provide temporary resources. Body plans might be radically different from what we're familiar with. Instead of circulatory systems based on liquid blood, perhaps organisms would have minimal internal fluids, using other methods to transport nutrients and remove waste. Maybe gas exchange through tracheal systems like insects, or something even more alien. Here's another possibility. What if plants, or their equivalent, were underground? On Earth, plants need sunlight, so they grow upward. But if water is the limiting resource, it might be advantageous to grow downward, extending roots deep into the soil to access groundwater. The photosynthetic portions might be minimal, small, tough structures at the surface, just enough to harvest light, while most of the organism lives underground, where it's cooler and moister. Could intelligent life evolve on a desert planet? It seems less likely than on a temperate, water-rich world, but not impossible. Intelligence is energetically expensive, requiring significant resources to maintain large brains and nervous systems. A resource-poor environment might not support such luxury. However, desert environments do create selection pressure for problem-solving and adaptability, traits that can lead to intelligence. If intelligence did evolve, such beings might have a culture deeply centered on water conservation and resource management. Every aspect of their technology and society would be shaped by the fundamental scarcity of water. They might find worlds like Earth, with vast oceans and abundant rain, to be almost unimaginable paradises, or perhaps terrifyingly unstable and chaotic environments. There's another type of desert planet worth considering, an old planet orbiting an old star. Our sun will eventually expand into a red giant, engulfing the inner planets and boiling away Earth's oceans. But what about planets farther out, like Mars or the outer planets' moons? As the sun expands, these currently frozen worlds might briefly become warm and potentially habitable. And when the sun finally shrinks to a white dwarf, they would cool and dry out, becoming desert worlds with only remnant water locked in deep reservoirs. Life on such a planet would be descendant of organisms that once thrived in wetter conditions. Evolution would gradually adapt lineages to increasing aridity, selecting for ever more efficient water conservation. This might produce organisms superbly adapted to dry conditions, with billions of years of selection for desert survival. Desert planets remind us that Earth's abundance of liquid water might be unusual rather than typical. Most planets are either too hot or too cold for liquid water on their surfaces, or lack sufficient water in the first place. Life that can tolerate or even prefer dry conditions might be more common in the universe than water-loving organisms like us. We might be the unusual ones, adapted to an unusually wet world. Gas giants and floating life. So far, we've focused on rocky planets with solid surfaces, but the universe also contains gas giants, enormous planets like Jupiter and Saturn, composed primarily of hydrogen and helium, with no solid surface to stand on. These worlds are completely unlike Earth. Could life exist in such alien environments? At first, this seems absurd. Gas giants are hostile places. Jupiter has intense radiation belts, crushing our atmospheric pressure at depth, and wind speeds exceeding 600 kilometers per hour. The temperature rises as you descend, eventually reaching thousands of degrees, where hydrogen transitions to a metallic state. There's no solid ground, no water in the sense we're familiar with, and conditions that would destroy any Earth organism instantly. But let's think more carefully. While the extremes of gas giants would be deadly, there are regions within their atmospheres where conditions might be more moderate. At a certain depth, the temperature and pressure could be similar to Earth's surface. There might be layers where water exists as vapor, or perhaps even as liquid droplets in clouds. If life could exist as airborne organisms, never landing, always drifting or actively flying, a gas giant might offer habitable zones within its atmosphere. This idea was seriously explored by Carl Sagan and Edwin Salpeter in a famous 1976 paper. They imagined an ecosystem of floating organisms in Jupiter's atmosphere, tiny sinkers that would sink slowly through the atmosphere, multiplying by using photosynthesis or chemical reactions. Larger floaters that would maintain their altitude using gas bladders or by heating the hydrogen around them. And enormous hunters, km-scale creatures that would cruise through the clouds, feeding on floaters. Let's explore this concept. The base of such an ecosystem might be microscopic organisms suspended in the upper atmosphere, where sunlight penetrates. These organisms would need to be very lightweight, perhaps balloon-like structures, filled with hydrogen or helium to remain buoyant. They might harvest energy from sunlight or from chemical reactions in the atmosphere, perhaps using the abundant hydrogen as a raw material. But there's a problem. Gravity. Everything tends to sink. On Earth, plankton in the ocean slowly sink, but they can form spores that eventually reach the surface again, or ocean currents can lift them. In a gas giant's atmosphere, anything that sinks eventually reaches regions of crushing pressure and searing heat. There's no surface to settle on, no bottom to rest on, only progressively worse conditions until the organism is destroyed. So life in a gas giant atmosphere would need ways to stay aloft. Small organisms might be naturally buoyant if they're mostly hollow with thin membranes. Larger organisms would need more sophisticated mechanisms, actively heating the gas around them, like a living hot air balloon, might work, producing gases lighter than the surrounding atmosphere, hydrogen, helium, or even vacuum-filled chambers, if the membrane is strong enough, could provide lift. Or perhaps life would simply accept that it will eventually sink and adopt a strategy of rapid reproduction in the upper atmosphere. Organisms would reproduce quickly while drifting upward on atmospheric convection currents, with their offspring eventually sinking back down. It would be a continuous cycle of rise and fall, reproduction and death, with the overall population sustained by those lucky enough to ride updrafts. What might these organisms look like? Think of jellyfish-like creatures drifting through clouds, their tentacles extracting chemicals from the air, or perhaps enormous, thin membranes, living sails catching atmospheric currents. In the deeper, denser atmosphere, where pressure increases, organisms might be more compact and robust, adapted to handle greater forces. Could complex large organisms exist? Sagan and Salpeter's hunters would be enormous, perhaps kilometers across, to have a low enough density to float. They'd be like living zeppelins, cruising through Jupiter's cloud layers, engulfing smaller organisms. The sheer scale is mind-boggling, but the physics might allow it. With a lightweight structure and a body full of hydrogen, such creatures could theoretically float indefinitely. Would intelligence evolve in such an environment? That's harder to say. The energy available from sunlight at Jupiter's distance from the Sun is relatively limited compared to Earth. The environment is three-dimensional, but also relatively homogeneous. Endless sky in all directions. There might be fewer ecological niches and less biodiversity than on a rocky planet with varied environments. But over billions of years, who knows what evolution might produce? One intriguing aspect: organisms in a gas giant's atmosphere would never see a surface. Their entire universe would be sky. Looking down, they'd see only deepening clouds and darkness. Looking up, they'd see the stars and space. They might have no concept of ground or solid matter. Everything in their experience would be fluid, shifting, atmospheric. Here's another thought. We don't necessarily need to look at giant planets like Jupiter. What about smaller worlds with thick atmospheres? Venus, despite its hellish surface temperatures, has regions in its upper atmosphere where temperature and pressure are quite Earth-like. Some scientists have speculated about floating microbes in Venus's clouds, though recent studies of its atmospheric chemistry make this seem less likely. Still, the principle holds. You don't need a hospitable surface if there are hospitable layers in the atmosphere. Or consider a world we haven't discussed yet, a planet with an atmosphere so dense and deep that there's no clear boundary between gas and liquid, or even liquid and solid. At a certain depth, increasing pressure would compress gases into supercritical fluids with properties of both gas and liquid. Even deeper, materials might be compressed into exotic states. Life might exist throughout these transitional zones, adapting to conditions at each level. Gas giants and atmospheric life challenge our surface-centric thinking. We're creatures of the land-ocean interface, and we naturally imagine life existing on surfaces. But the universe contains vast regions that are all atmosphere. Planets, yes, but also the stars themselves. No one seriously suggests life in the sun, but the principle is worth remembering. Habitable doesn't necessarily mean solid ground beneath your feet. Ice giants and exotic chemistry. Let's venture even further from the familiar and consider ice giants, planets like Uranus and Neptune in our solar system. These worlds are fundamentally different from both rocky terrestrial planets and hydrogen-dominated gas giants. They're composed primarily of ices, though this is a misleading term because these materials aren't frozen solid, but rather exist in hot, dense fluid states under extreme pressure. Uranus and Neptune's interiors contain vast oceans of water, ammonia, and methane under pressures millions of times Earth's atmospheric pressure, and at temperatures of thousands of degrees. These aren't the comfortable oceans we imagine. They're exotic high-pressure fluids where familiar chemical rules are bent or broken. Could life exist in such alien environments? Conventional wisdom says no. The temperatures and pressures seem too extreme, the chemistry too different from anything we understand. But let's think more carefully. Under extreme pressure, matter behaves in unexpected ways. Water can exist in numerous exotic forms, different types of ice that remain solid even at high temperatures. Compounds that would never react under normal conditions can be forced together. Entirely new types of chemical bonds can form. Scientists have discovered that under the pressures inside ice giants, water might separate into hydrogen and oxygen, with the hydrogen becoming metallic while oxygen forms exotic compounds. Methane might break down into carbon and hydrogen, with the carbon potentially forming diamonds that rain down toward the planet's core. These are conditions completely unlike anything on Earth's surface, yet they're not random chaos. They're different sets of physical rules that could potentially support different types of organization. Could life be based on high-pressure chemistry that doesn't work under normal conditions? It's at the extreme edge of speculation, but consider, life is fundamentally about maintaining organization against entropy, harvesting energy, and reproducing. If there are chemical systems under high pressure that can do these things, that can form self-replicating patterns, harvest energy gradients, and evolve, then by definition, that's life. Even if it bears no resemblance to Earth biology, such life would be utterly alien. It might not use anything we'd recognize as organic molecules. Its metabolism might be based on reactions that only occur under extreme pressure. It might exist on timescales very different from ours, either incredibly slow or remarkably fast depending on the kinetics of its chemistry. We would barely recognize it as life at all. Here's an easier scenario to imagine. What about the ice giant's outer layers? At certain depths, these planets might have regions where temperature and pressure are more moderate, possibly allowing for more familiar chemistry. Ammonia-water mixtures can remain liquid at temperatures and pressures that might exist in these transition zones. Life based on ammonia-water chemistry could potentially exist in specific layers of an ice giant. Ammonia is a decent solvent, not as good as water, but functional. It has a wide liquid range when mixed with water, remaining liquid down to very low temperatures. Ammonia-based life might actually be more feasible than pure water life on many cold worlds. On an ice giant, a layer of ammonia-water solution at just the right depth could provide a habitable zone, insulated from both the cold vacuum of space and the crushing depths below. What would organisms in such an environment look like? They'd be adapted to pressure and cold that would destroy Earth life. They might be more like Earth's extremophils than complex organisms, simple, robust, able to tolerate wide swings in conditions as atmospheric convection carried them to different depths. Or perhaps, given enough time, complexity would evolve even in such seemingly hostile places. Let's also consider the chemical diversity available on ice giants. These worlds contain all the elements needed for life: carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, hydrogen, plus traces of sulfur, phosphorus, and metals. The chemistry might be exotic, but the raw materials are present. Complex organic molecules, precursors to life, have been detected in the atmospheres of ice giants. Whether these could ever organize into living systems is unknown, but the building blocks are there. Now, a philosophical point. We're limited by our imagination and our experience. Every scenario we've discussed is rooted in chemistry and physics we understand. But the universe has had billions of years and countless worlds to experiment with. There might be forms of organization, types of complexity that we simply haven't imagined because they don't exist on Earth and don't fit our paradigms. Silicon-based life is a classic science fiction trope, but real silicon biochemistry faces challenges we've discussed. However, what about life based on more exotic elements? Under the right conditions, could sulfur or nitrogen or phosphorus form the backbone of complex chemistry? Could life use electrical or magnetic fields as information storage rather than chemical bonds? Could quantum effects play a role in alien biochemistry? These questions push against the boundaries of what we can reasonably speculate about. Without examples or experimental evidence, we're essentially guessing. But they're worth keeping in mind. Our catalogue of possible life forms might be limited more by our imagination than by nature's possibilities. Ice giants remind us that most of the universe is nothing like Earth. The gentle surface conditions we enjoy, liquid water, moderate temperatures and pressures, a protective but not oppressive atmosphere, are rare and specific. Most planets are either too hot or too cold, too high pressure or too low, too much radiation or too little energy. Yet in all this diversity, there might be countless niches where life, in some form, has found a foothold. Rogue planets and life without stars. Before we conclude, let's consider one of the strangest categories of potentially habitable worlds: rogue planets, worlds that don't orbit any star, but instead drift through interstellar space, cold and dark and alone. These planets aren't hypothetical. Astronomers have detected several, and statistical studies suggest there might be billions of them in our galaxy, possibly outnumbering stars themselves. Most rogue planets are thought to form around stars like normal planets, but then get ejected through gravitational interactions. Close encounters with other planets or passing stars that fling them into the darkness. Once ejected, they travel through space indefinitely, never again knowing the warmth of a sun. At first glance, a rogue planet seems completely inhospitable. With no star, there's no sunlight for photosynthesis, no solar-driven weather, no day-night cycle. The surface, if exposed to space, would be frozen solid, at temperatures just a few degrees above absolute zero. Everything would be locked in eternal darkness and cold. But look beneath the surface. Planets retain heat from their formation. The gravitational energy released as material collapsed to form the planet, plus heat from radioactive decay of elements, like uranium, thorium, and potassium in the planet's interior. This internal heat can persist for billions of years. Earth's core temperature is estimated at about 6,000 degrees Celsius, comparable to the Sun's surface. This heat drives our planet's geology, volcanism, plate tectonics, the magnetic field. Even without the Sun, Earth's interior would remain hot for billions of years. The surface would freeze without solar heating, but deep underground, temperatures would remain high. A rogue planet might have a frozen surface but liquid water or other solvents beneath a thick ice shell. The ice would act as insulation, trapping heat from the planet's interior. Below the ice, in the darkness, there could be oceans warmed by geothermal heat. We've already discussed this scenario for moons like Europa, but it applies equally to rogue planets. In such subsurface oceans, life could exist without ever knowing that stars exist. The energy would come entirely from geological processes, hydrothermal vents releasing chemicals and heat from the planet's interior. Chemosynthetic organisms would form the base of the food chain, just as they do at Earth's deep-sea vents. More complex organisms might feed on them, creating an ecosystem completely independent of any star. What would this biosphere be like? Permanently dark, so eyes would be useless unless some organisms produced bioluminescence. The environment would be stable. No seasons, no day-night cycle, just the slow cooling of the planet over billions of years. Evolution would occur in isolation, with no external influences besides whatever arrived on the planet before it was ejected. Could intelligent life evolve in such a place? the limited energy budget might be a constraint. Intelligence is expensive energetically, and a rogue planet's ecosystems might not produce enough excess energy to support it. But over billions of years, who knows? If intelligence did evolve, such beings would have no knowledge of the wider universe. They'd be trapped beneath kilometers of ice, with no way to know that stars, galaxies, and other worlds existed. Imagine the psychology of such a species if they ever discovered the truth. Their entire universe would be the ocean and rock around them. The concept of outside would be foreign. Beyond the ice ceiling above and the rock floor below, they might imagine only more ocean or rock extending forever. Then suppose they developed technology sufficient to drill through the ice, and for the first time saw the stars. The revelation would be almost incomprehensible, an entire universe they never suspected, filled with light and objects so distant they couldn't be reached. Here's another possibility. A rogue planet might not be entirely frozen. If it's massive enough and has a thick enough atmosphere, the atmospheric pressure could keep the surface relatively warm through the greenhouse effect, even without a star. The atmosphere would trap the planet's internal heat, potentially maintaining liquid water on the surface, despite the lack of sunlight. Such a planet would be bizarre, a world lit only by lightning, auroras, and perhaps bioluminescence. Life would exist in perpetual twilight or darkness, feeding on chemical energy. The atmosphere might glow faintly from chemical reactions or from impacts of interstellar material. It would be dim, certainly, but not necessarily completely dark. Or consider a rogue planet with extreme volcanic activity. Volcanoes would light the darkness with lava flows and create localized warm zones. Life might cluster around these volcanic regions, creating oases of warmth and energy in an otherwise frozen world. The planet would be a patchwork of frozen wastelands and volcanic hotspots, with ecosystems adapted to both. Rogue planets also raise an interesting question about panspermia, the idea that life might spread between planets or even between star systems. If a rogue planet was ejected from a system where life already existed, it might carry that life with it. Microbes in subsurface environments could survive the ejection and continue to exist as the planet drifted through space. Over millions of years, the rogue planet might travel through multiple star systems, potentially capturing smaller objects, or even being captured by a new star. In this way, life could spread across the galaxy in ways we haven't considered. Rogue planets are a reminder that habitability isn't just about the traditional Goldilocks zone around stars. The universe contains countless environments where life might persist if it can tap into energy sources other than starlight. These dark, wandering worlds might be more common than sunlit planets like Earth, meaning that most life in the universe could exist in permanent darkness, sustained by planetary heat rather than stellar light. Conclusion: the diversity of possible life. We've journeyed across a spectrum of alien worlds, from the crushing gravity of super-Earths to the frozen darkness of rogue planets, from radiation-blasted rocks to vast oceans with no solid ground. Each environment presents unique challenges and would shape life in profoundly different ways. The forms we've imagined, compact, heavily built organisms on high-gravity worlds, radiation-resistant creatures with sophisticated repair mechanisms, floating jellyfish-like beings in gas-giant atmospheres. These are informed speculations based on our understanding of physics, chemistry, and biology. But here's the truth: we really don't know what alien life looks like. We have a sample size of one, Earth, and while Earth's diversity is impressive, it's still just one example of what's possible. Life on this planet uses DNA, relies on water, is built from carbon compounds, and follows certain evolutionary patterns. But these might be just one solution, among many to the problem of being alive. What we do know is that life, at least on Earth, is remarkably resilient and adaptable. We find organisms in boiling volcanic springs and in Antarctic ice, in the crushing depths of the ocean, and in the upper atmosphere, in solid rock miles beneath the surface, and in the radioactive environment of nuclear reactors. Life persists in salt crystals, survives vacuum and radiation in space experiments, and thrives in conditions we once thought utterly incompatible with biology. This gives us reason to suspect that life in the universe might be common, even if complex life or intelligence might be rare. The building blocks of life, organic molecules, are found throughout space, in interstellar clouds, on asteroids and comets, and in the atmospheres of planets and moons. The universe is full of the raw materials for life, and given liquid solvents, energy sources, and time, chemistry has a tendency to become increasingly complex. Every world we've discussed, super-Earths, tidally locked planets, ocean worlds, high radiation planets, frozen worlds, deserts, gas giants, ice giants, and rogue planets exist somewhere in the universe. In our galaxy alone, there are hundreds of billions of stars, and planet formation seems to be a common outcome of stellar birth. Many, if not most stars, have planets. That means hundreds of billions of potentially habitable environments, each with its own unique conditions. When we look for life in the universe, we need to keep our minds open to possibilities we haven't imagined. Life might not look like anything we're familiar with. It might use chemistry we don't understand, exist in environments we'd consider impossible, and solve problems in ways we wouldn't predict. The aliens we find, if we find them, might be so different from us that recognizing them as life at all could be challenging. But that's part of what makes this search so exciting. We're not just looking for creatures like ourselves on planets like Earth. We're exploring the full range of what's physically possible, probing the outer limits of where chemistry can give rise to complexity, metabolism, and reproduction. We're asking one of the deepest questions there is: how many ways can the universe become alive? The answer, we suspect, is far more diverse and wonderful than we've yet imagined. Out there, on some distant world orbiting an unknown star, there might be organisms living lives we can barely conceive of. They might see wavelengths of light we can't detect, communicate through methods we've never thought of, and think thoughts in cognitive architectures completely unlike our own. Or they might be simple, single-celled organisms, no more remarkable than Earth's bacteria, except for the fact that they evolved independently on another world, proving that life is not unique to our small planet. Every world is an experiment in what's possible. Earth's experiment produced us and countless other species across billions of years. Other worlds are running their own experiments right now, and we're only just beginning to have the tools to detect them. In the coming decades, new telescopes and missions will examine the atmospheres of distant planets, looking for biosignatures, chemical signatures that might indicate life. We'll send probes to the ice-covered moons of our own solar system, drilling through frozen shells to sample hidden oceans. We'll listen for signals from distant civilizations and search for artifacts left by others who came before. The question, what does alien life look like, doesn't have a single answer. It has as many answers as there are worlds where life has found a way to begin. Each one is a unique story of adaptation and evolution, shaped by the specific conditions of its environment. Some might resemble Earth life superficially, through convergent evolution, arriving at similar solutions. Others might be so alien that we'd struggle to recognize them as alive. And that's the beautiful mystery of it. The universe is vast beyond comprehension, and within that vastness, there's room for every possibility we've discussed and countless more we haven't thought of. Life finds a way, not just one way, but every way that physics and chemistry allow. Our journey tonight has only scratched the surface of what might be out there, waiting to be discovered. So the next time you look up at the night sky, remember, each of those lights might host worlds we can barely imagine, and on some of them, strange and wonderful forms of life might be looking back, wondering the same thing we wonder. Are we alone? The answer almost certainly is no. We're not alone. We're part of a cosmos, teeming with life in forms diverse and strange, beautiful and surprising. We just haven't met our neighbours yet, but someday, perhaps, we will. And when we do, the universe will become an even more amazing place than we ever dreamed. Thank you for joining me on this journey across the cosmos tonight. Keep looking up, keep wondering, and keep imagining the infinite possibilities that await us among the stars.